Thank you everybody for coming for first in this year's Summer Speaker Series, which is co-hosted with the Museum of the Portage. So, well, the series theme this year is trails. Looking at trails not just as the physical routes on landscape, ancient trails converging on Portage, physical trails, but also looking at trails in terms of the aspect of trails being kind of paths through life circumstances. Different cultures, different people groups, different places and times have had significant paths through life circumstances that converge here at Portage, all throughout the state. So tonight we're going to be looking at kind of that aspect of a trail story, the trail's experience of early settlers coming to Wisconsin. Each family came to Wisconsin back in 1830s through 60s, 70s, 80s. Each of those families had their own trail experience, their experience of what they encountered when they came to America, their experience once they got here. I guess in some cases, just the travels to get here. So every family had their own unique experience. But there's also a lot of commonalities and things that we can relate to today also. So tonight we're going to be hearing from Dr. Michael Stevens, who wrote a book, The Making of Pioneer Wisconsin, The Voices of Early Settlers. And we are going to have the book in the gift shop, but it's not here yet, unfortunately. But anyway, he's done a lot of research on some of these experiences of early settlers, early immigrants coming to Wisconsin, and looking forward to hearing that perspective on trails tonight. So, come on up.
Well, thanks for inviting me. When I was a younger man and people asked me, why are you a historian? I would say, well, to understand the past and, all kinds of high-minded things. But one of the great things about this project is I had to read a lot of correspondence, so I get to read other people's mail. How many jobs do you have where you can read other people's mail? As Adam said, I'm going to be talking about the men, women, and children, introducing you to some of them, their stories on the making of Pioneer Wisconsin. I was very interested in the emotional aspect and that those sets of feelings which often get overlooked in history, which tends to be about institutions and the like. And so you won't meet them all 40 of them that I selected, men, women, and children from different parts of the state, include their text with my commentary. And it does include, the stories do include trails, both physical ones made of dirt and watery ones made of oceans and lakes and rivers, and those metaphorical ones, the experience where they really had to change their lives. We tend to look at that generation of immigrants, and a lot of you may have seen it either in your family's papers or here, these daguerreotypes, photographs that were taken 1850s and 60s, and everyone had to stand very still, right? Because of the technology and because of the bad dentistry, you didn't want to smile, and very still, but they look kind of scary. And what I'd like to do is introduce you to some of them and show you that some of their experiences aren't all that different than some of the things we experience. So let me set the stage, first of all. What do we mean by the pioneer era? For this book, and this talk, I'm looking at about 1830. There was a couple named the Kinseys who came to Portage in 1830. 1830 to 1855, just after statehood. And think of the changes that were experienced. 1830, who was here in this land we call Wisconsin? Most people who were here were Ho-Chunk or Menominee or Potawatomi or Ojibwe or Oneida or Stockbridge or Muncie. Native Americans outnumbered Euro-American people in 1830. Fast forward to 25 years. We think we're in a time of tremendous change. In those 25 years, about 750,000 people moved into this land of Wisconsin. That's huge. Half of those people were American born, so they had to move a substantial distance from the east, west. The other half were foreign born. Huge number of changes. And of those foreign born, half of them didn't speak a word of English. So there's this tremendous variety going on in this land that's Wisconsin. The foreign born mostly were Norwegians and Germans and Danes and Swiss and English. There were other folks, but we sometimes call those immigrants. I think they're all pioneers. They're all settling at the same time. So by telling the stories through the words of the people, we get at hear their fears and their excitements and their decisions they made. So let me introduce you to a few. And the first one I call the advice giver, although if he were today, he'd probably be writing a advice columnist, or maybe he'd be developing Google search software. His name is Christian Ficker. He came from Saxony. He was a musician. But you can't make a living as a musician in Wisconsin in 1840, so he's also a farmer in Mequon. But he loved giving advice. In fact, if you wanted to know something, Christian was the one to go to. If you didn't want to know something, Christian would still be happy to give you advice. He loved giving advice so much he even wrote a book in German, published in Germany, and the English translation is The Friendly Advisor for all who would emigrate to America, and particularly to Wisconsin. You want to know, where do I get a ship? Well, you go here, you come to New York. All right, you got two choices. You got the easy way and the hard way. The hard way is cheaper, and they're going to probably take your money and not get you to where you want to be, and you'll end up paying the more money to go the easy way, but it's your choice. He also told people, should you come to Wisconsin? He says, well, it depends on who you are. If you're a doctor, plenty of work here. Come here. On the other hand, if you are a lawyer, are there any lawyers in this room? Okay. If you're a lawyer, unless you can use a 5-pound axe, better remain in Germany. Not. So he had lots of advice. 3 pieces of advice, though, still seem to hold true today. One was, don't be proud. Don't think as soon as you walk into Wisconsin, people will say, oh, you're such a wonderful person. You can make a laughingstock of yourself. Learn what's going on. Take time. People respect you, but don't expect to have the same status. The second one was a bit controversial. Stop being a German and be an American. Ooh, not everybody liked that advice. Ole Munch-Rader, a Norwegian, would not have liked that. When he heard people saying that, what Ole would say is, yes, let the Norwegian immigrants become Americans. It's their duty, But this doesn't prevent them from remaining Norwegians for a long time. And the third piece of Christian's advice was, know what you're talking about before opening your mouth. I think that holds very well, too. I think we can all connect with that. So what did pioneers like to talk about when they opened their mouths? Well, think about, what do we like to talk about? Several people walked in and said, nice weather today, isn't fun, Or in the wintertime, oh, gonna be cold coming up. What did Ficker say about the weather? Because he did talk about it. He says, well, you come to Wisconsin, the summer heat is oppressive. The winter is pretty cold, pretty severe. The weather is extraordinarily changeable, and the fall is glorious and beautiful. He could fit in very well there. Other people talked about the weather. There's a guy, I don't know his name, but he published an unsigned piece in an 1839 newspaper in Mineral Point. And he's trying to encourage people to come to Wisconsin. Don't go to Illinois. Don't go to Indiana. Come to Wisconsin. It's much better there. One problem, he's writing in the last week of October, and there's 4 inches of snow on the ground. He's trying to make the case that it's much better here than in Illinois and Indiana. 4 inches. This guy could work in a Madison Avenue public relations thing. He says our winters, though perhaps somewhat colder, are much more pleasant and healthy. They are uniform throughout. The air clear and bracing. We have none of their, and he's referring to Illinois and Indiana here, we have none of their half cold, half warm, wet, disagreeable, slushy winter weather. We never hear of people dying with consumption and seldom hear complaints of coughs and colds. That is spin. That is spin. So, what else do they talk about? Well, the water and land trails, they talked about the experience of coming. But for those traveling by water on those water trails, there was one subject that dominated over. Yeah, they talked about seasickness and monotony and the different people they met and occasionally seeing whales. One thing, no matter what country you came about, food. I think we like to talk about food. What's for dinner, honey? Or did you hear about that new restaurant that's coming in? Or, boy, I had a great lunch today. Or, boy, that lunch wasn't, Food was, whatever ethnic group you were, that talking about. So John Remus, he's from the Netherlands, eventually settled in Milwaukee. This is what he wrote about food on the trip, on the ship over. The potatoes became worse each day. Drinking water was becoming brackish, and everybody was tired of peas and beans. Not a recommendation. Give me the airline food instead. No, they didn't have airlines then. Matthias Sturz, he's from Switzerland, and as you might expect, settled in New Glarus. How's the food? Well, the meat is all packed in barrels and so much salted that we have to wash it many times and then parboil it again and throw the water away until it was fresher. But even then, it was hardly edible. We have plenty of hardtack, sufficient, but this is not a human food. The pigs that are kept on ship refuse to eat it. It's in quarter-pound pieces and of a dark brown color inside and out, and it's so hard as to require a hammer to break it up into pieces. The flour is gritty with sand. The potatoes are very bad, black, bad-smelling, and rotten, hardly fit for pigs. So his advice was, if you value your health, bring your own food along for the voyage. Once in America, though, what did the story change? Well, they still talk about food. You're settled here, you finish the trip, and there's a theme that's going to emerge here. So George Frommeter, he grew up in Bavaria, settled in Jefferson. Writes home, says, here in America, one eats meat every day, sometimes twice, and in the mornings and evenings we have coffee. The Americans, meaning the native-borns, the Americans have meat on the table 3 times a day, and many kinds of vegetables which we don't know of in Germany. So that theme of, hey, we're doing well here. We have meat every day. Every day we've got meat. John Frederick Diedrichs grew up in the Ruhr Valley, western Germany, eastern France, settled in Manitowoc. And he too talked about the abundance of food on his farm. And he's writing back about his practices. You'd go out in the morning, work in the fields. You'd have your main meal early afternoon, what we call lunch is the dinner, and then go back in the fields later, and then come in the evening for a lighter meal. So he's talking about what they eat. He says, towards noon, we return to the house, and Mother has white beans with bacon. Notice the meat, making that little point there. White beans with bacon, or bean soup with bacon, or rice soup with bacon, or barley soup with bacon, or flour dumplings with bacon, which last combination usually constitutes our Sunday meal. Then in the evening, everyone comes home where they treated themselves with black coffee, dry bread, and bacon. Get the message out that we've got food here. Well, if you're coming by land, if you're a native born in the U.S., there are different obstacles. Today we want to know, well, I want to get here to there, and you put out your phone and put the map on, and you know where it is, and you got airline schedules and train schedules. But the decision to relocate far away from family and friends wasn't easy, nor was the logistics of getting around. Henry Seymour Eggleston, he was born in Vermont, settled in New York, married, started a family, and he was struck with what we called Wisconsin fever. We've heard about this wonderful place called Wisconsin. So he's working his way across, he's leaving his wife, he's going to send them, wife and kids, back to New York, and he's going to make money by working his way west. So he's made it as far as Michigan, and he's going to try to make enough money. And he soon starts hearing news about Wisconsin. And he writes back to his wife, August 1849. I got thinking about Wisconsin. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted to see it. I made up my mind that I couldn't wait till Monday, so when I got to the shop, I told the boss I wanted to settle. He collected his money. So, how does he get there? Well, he heads out for the promised land. He takes a ship to what's now Kenosha, it was called South Point then. Then, next day, takes the stage to Salem, 16 miles. Then, from there, there's no stage, but he says, I found a young fellow going to Elkhorn. So he's not going to Elkhorn, but, take that, got to ride with them. And then he's there in Elkhorn, and next morning he hires his landlord to give him a ride to Richmond. But his wife's still back in New York. He does have a cousin in Richmond, and he decides he's going to sneak up and not tell her. And just there, so he walks in, she runs a bar, puts his head down, and says, I'm a beer. She looks at him. You can't fool me, Henry Eggleston. And, he meets their little baby. And he calls a badger. Isn't that interesting? 1840. He says, I met the little badger, and born here. So he writes back to his wife. And so he's trying to, how is she supposed to get here? And he suggests, well, you're going to want to land in Milwaukee. And you'll find lots of teams. A lot of farmers are going into Milwaukee full of produce and other crops. The wagons are empty, so you can get a lot of, good rides. I should have known that before that, but, landing in Milwaukee. And, you can get your luggage taken care of. I suggest you leave your luggage in Milwaukee because we don't quite know where we're going to be going here. So, go that way, and then we can send for it when we decide where we're going to go. Or you can come by a mixture of water and land. In 1830, it took a solitary traveler 3 to 4 weeks to travel to New York, to Wisconsin, over turnpikes and canals and rivers. Some would take the Erie Canal and go through the Great Lakes. Others would go down the Ohio River and hang right by St. Louis and head up north on Mississippi. You get the west side of Wisconsin. Well, Charles Minton Barker, he was an attorney, and he left Vermont in 1838, and he used both land and water routes, and didn't like either of them. And he let people know that. So he's going across New York, and stopping, there's a large Dutch population remaining in New York, and they stop in Mannheim on the Mohawk River. He says the sheets and pillows were so dirty that Mrs. Barker would not sleep on them. Do another place. Called it a Dutch tavern in the morning, and the landlord wondered why we went so far for. Why are you here? Well, eventually could get in, and they make it to Buffalo, and then take a steamer to Detroit. So we got to Buffalo, we traveled today 34 minutes, but schedules don't go as planned. Schedules are more suggestions of when it's going to leave rather than definite times based on the conditions. So we sit in the port, and it's very tedious and a very, very mixed group of people. He says there are people from every tongue and nation here, the rich and poor, the civil and uncivil, the neat and the quiet, the noisy and the dirty, the pious and the praying, the impious and swearing, the genteel and fashionable, the ragged and filthy and disgusting. So they take the ship, but you can get seasick on the Great Lakes. And they had 2 hours of that. And he says, yes, some were hanging over the sides of the vessel. Others were reeling and staggering wherever it lurched. We were exposed to the rolling waves for about 2 hours. And so looking around, here's crying and scolding and snoring and groaning. Some are stretched on beds, others on mattresses and cushions and cloaks. Not a few are trying to find the soft side of a hard floor. Such is steamboat life on Lake Erie, a scene that I wish not to experience again. Well, land journeys had their own problems too. A fella, 19 years old, George Smith, was moving from Ohio to Kenosha with his parents and I believe 1 or 2 of his brothers. And they're taking their horses and their carriages across. Roads aren't too good, and they got stuck 50 miles east of Chicago in Indiana, 1843. And they're going to have to stay at it, and they're not going to be able to keep going. But he heard that a gang of the notorious Bill Laffey, horse thieves and counterfeiters, were around here. So they're a little on edge. They've been warned about that. He says, I looked ahead and we saw this low, rakish, dirty-looking building with a rickety sign in front which was lettered Tavern. What are you going to do? There's no Best Western or Holiday Inn, or that's what you got to do. So we drove up to the door, and out came Mr. Landlord. I wish you could have seen him with his red, bushy hair, his big, bloated face, and this by bad whiskey, which abounds in this neighborhood, which is commonly called red eye, literally dripping from his eyes, which were red eyes in truth. He had a bright red vest, much worn, a pair of green and red striped pantaloons, and a big, dirty green beige scarf tied by the ends in front. And right at his heels were 2 big bulldogs that looked fierce and ugly enough, but not so bad as their master. So they asked him whether he'd have room, and he said, supposed you could stay. Was going to give them rooms, non-adjoining, and said, we'd like to stay together here. So we had hardly commenced unloading when out came 5 or 6 of mine host's cronies. They reminded me of many big black snakes. Of course, we took them to horse thieves, and our fears were excited that they might have been promoted to the higher degree of crimes, for they certainly looked that they were ripe for treason, stratagem, and murder. We would have gladly left this place, but stay we must. So we determined, therefore, to pass a sleepless night in the hotel, and we did. We succeeded in getting 2 rooms adjoining. Our rooms looked out to the barn. We each had a big hickory cane and a pistol. We watched the barn, listened intently all night long in constant fear that some evil was to befall us. Once or twice during the night, we thought we heard some unusual stir in the house and about the barn, but the morning, and a bright cold morning it was, found us safe from harm. Say we were worried from our watching. Our houses were all safe and they had been well cared for. A comfortable breakfast was prepared for us. At about 9 a.m., we left the place where our fears had been so excited that I must say that all the inmates in the house looked better to us than they did the night before. I thought about this matter, and I must do those rough fellows the justice to say that in estimating them, we rather reasoned from our fears. They were rough-looking men, to be sure, and what we heard excited our fears, and we looked at these men with distorted visions. At all events, they did not molest us, and in the morning they all seemed kind and obliging, and the landlord assisted us with a will and a grace that would have done honor at a more elegant establishment. So you not only had to deal with possible real problems, but there's that fear that, stay up all night watching. And they got a great breakfast to boot. Well, once in Wisconsin, men and women had other things other than the journey to think and talk about. And one which we forget is the gender imbalance. In 1840, Wisconsin had 8 males for every 5 females. So what do you think young men thought about and talked about? John Hodgson, Yorkshire, England, settled in rural Iowa County, Reesville. He wrote back, girls are very scarce here. They're all bachelors around us. Tell them I could be very much at home if I could have a missus around. Well, man is free here, and there are 7 rich widows, but I'm the poorest man in the territory. Could you bring a flock of lassies with you when you come here? Well, what do women think about? I think they thought about men, right? They're not that different. And that experience was varied. Veronica Curler-Frank, German woman, and she was 24 years old, newly married, when she wrote a letter to her new in-laws back in Germany saying, hi, guess what? You don't know me, but I'm your daughter-in-law. Your son married me. We had this 2-week whirlwind engagement, and, and her husband was a German merchant in Milwaukee. They lived above the store. And so she describes her wedding. She's not quite Bridezilla, but she has that same level of excitement describing everything. She had this new black dress, useful for wearing to a funeral too, right? You don't want to buy something that's once. And so excited about that. And then she goes into her details as housewife, and she is as giddy as any other new bride. She talks about how she gets up, doesn't wake up her husband, gets up early to start making breakfast. When the breakfast is ready, she comes, and he has a beard, and she pulls on his beard to wake up. Oh, isn't that cute, And so, yeah, I think that wore off. So after breakfast at 7, she can do sewing or other things around the house. But then at 10, she has to start preparing dinner. Again, the main meal is about 1 o'clock, right? So she had a couple hours, and making that isn't that fun. And in the afternoon, she sews till 5, and then starts working on supper. And she's very giddy. I read her later letters. They did not have that exuberance about those kinds of things. And then when the kids came, they were even less exuberant. But that was one experience. There's other experiences. Elizabeth Therese Baird, born of British, French, and native ancestry, talented woman, married at the age of 14. And she didn't speak English initially, but all her neighbors did. She writes, as I did not talk English, speaking only a few words, understanding a little, conversation with my neighbors weren't interesting to me. And so my life was very solitary. Her husband was an attorney who rode the circuit, so he'd leave. And says, I shed many tears. And another letter her friend says, you cannot imagine how very lonely I feel. I'm now at liberty to give way to my feelings. I want to see you today that I do not know what to do. I know you will feel sorry. I'm in such low spirits. I had the blues most horribly. What do you think? We'd probably diagnose that as depression today, but it's another experience, and there's similar experiences of men with that. My single favorite person, though, I came across here is a woman named Rachel Wood Bass. She She was 20 years old, single, and came out to Vermont, to Platteville. The rest of her family stayed in Vermont, but she came out to Platteville. And she was a school teacher. She taught the youngest group of kids, probably what we would say are kindergartners today to maybe second and third graders. So she's writing back home, and she's writing about the day after school ended. Anybody here ever been a school teacher? Yeah, okay. Well, you can tell me whether her experience is similar to yours. So she's writing about the day after school ended. You cannot well imagine my joy which I experienced the succeeding day. I felt as though my shackles were off, as though I was free as a bird in the air. I was not required to be in school the next day, the next week, or next month. Does that sound familiar? I see a few nodding heads, yeah. So, well, even better, she says, so I went into town a week later, and I saw some of the kids out there shopping, and they look so cute, and I just miss them because they're so cute. So, again, not a downer. Well, Racheline, although she loved her job and she met a man that she was engaged to, she did miss her family, and so she wrote to her sister Mary in 1840 and said, would you come out here? I'm engaged, you can live in the house, I'll give up my job, and you can have my job, just come out here. I don't know if you'd like my husband, but I like him, so it really doesn't matter whether you like him or not, right? And so her sister writes back and says, I can't come. It's too far to go to Wisconsin. I don't know anyone there. I don't have any time. And so Racheline writes back to her sister and says, I got your letter, and I had today a little cry. He says, I take your excuses, and they are null and void. You say it's too far. It's no farther from Vermont to Wisconsin than Wisconsin to Vermont. I mean, come on, this is, you say you don't know anybody. What am I? I'm your sister, and you have no time to prepare. Why do you have to get prepared? We have stores here. My husband-to-be is a store owner. You can get what you need. I consider your reasons null and void. So, sisters, the other thing you might have to deal with are new languages and customs, and that might affect where you chose to live. John Curler from Bavaria lived in Greenfield, Milwaukee County, and he's writing to someone thinking about moving to Wisconsin. He says, the main thing you need to consider is the language. Since English is spoken in court, trading, and in general, you'll find this all over North America. It's a little hard at first. Milwaukee is the only place in which I found that Americans concern themselves with learning German, and where the German language and German ways are bold enough to take a foothold. You will find here, if you come here, inns, beer cellars, billiard and bowling alleys, as well as German beer. Something which you do not find much in the rest of the country. What else did pioneers talk about? Well, they complained about the younger generation. Again, something I think we have in common. So Ole Munch Rader, who earlier we met him, he thought Norwegians, yeah, they should become Americans, but they should remain Norwegian. He's talking about the farm girls, the American-born farm girl daughters of the immigrants. Their English is quite correct, but as soon as they start to speak their mother tongue, it sounds broad and clumsy. So even if it is animated by the friendliest smile, and the farm boys, they're even worse. Once they learned how to do their math, they're embarrassed to admit they're Norwegian. Expectations. And that's what the move is about, expectations. And for those of us who are descended from immigrants who stayed here, their expectations must have been somewhat met, and they often wrote about those expectations. Frederick Diedrichs, this is our fellow with the bacon. Family wrote him, he says, is it really good in America? He says, I'm a farmer. I have 80 acres and livestock consisting of a dog and a cat. Is it really good in America? And I can give you the answer from my full conviction and in accordance with the truth, yes, it really is good here. He goes on later saying, yeah, it's hard, but I think my kids are going to have it easier than I have it. John Curler talks about the trade-offs. You got to think about the trade-offs. He says, here you have freedom, you have income, you have the sky and the earth, but also a strange language. He's talking about English here. Many low-class and rough country people, and little of the enjoyment that otherwise we could have in Germany. Anders and Johann Big, 1841. Originally, were sick, found it hard to find work, but over time, it starts getting a little more positive, and eventually say, Norwegians will make a better living here than in Norway. And that we do affirm that we've actually heard no one say he wished he were back, except for Jorgensen, who against the wishes of his wife set his mind on this, a most peculiar decision in the opinion of all Norwegians here. Then there are those who thought it wasn't too good. John Bjordalen, Milwaukee, 1844. Gets sick easily here, and it's too hot. I don't like the snakes, too many woods and swamps, taxes are too high, wages are too low. Thus, I do not advise any of my relatives to come to America. If you could see the conditions of the Norwegians in America at present, you would certainly be frightened. No Norwegian is ever going to be happy here. In conclusion, then, my relatives, do not think of coming to America at all. I guess his expectations weren't met there. But John Curler Jr., I think, put it well. One gets accustomed to everything by and by. And once the nut is cracked, the kernel tastes better in the end. So, the pioneers reflected on their experience, and they were aware that they were living in an important time of change. One of my favorite was an editorial written in a Racine newspaper in the early 1840s, before it became a state, and the piece was called The Wisconsin Character. And I think some of the things that this writer found about the Wisconsin character still are aspirations in Wisconsin. We don't meet them, I don't think they met them at that time, but I think they're aspirations. And he listed, 4 different things that he liked about living here. 1, there's a freedom and independence of mind in people. They think what they want to think. 2, a residence in a new country awakens enterprise. Think of Harley and Davidson and all the other things invented here. Says there's a tradition of hard work here. We hope to do that, but sometimes we do. And finally, he says there's a public spirit. People support building roads, schools, and churches. There is a more friendly, neighborly feeling here, which is something that I often feel in Wisconsin, this friendly, neighborly feeling. But then he goes on, he says, why do people in Wisconsin have this character? He says, well, the settler here finds within his acquaintance people from all the northern states. Everybody is from someplace else, and from many of the foreign countries too. And the people that he or she meets have been engaged in different occupations different than his own, much like the musician had to become a farmer or the lawyer who's using an axe. And consequently, he acquires a great variety of new ideas and thus becomes much more open in all his opinions and views of life. I like to think of that as still what Wisconsin is, and I think that I hope you leave this recognizing some of the continuity when next time you look at those daguerreotypes of the stiff, unstyling people. They're people with many similarities. So, thank you. Pioneer, Wisconsin, which I'm assured by Adam will be in stock here, or you can go online, but better to patronize your local stores here. So, any questions, comments? Well, I'll conclude with one other story, which my wife has kindly heard so many times, and I try to change it for her, but this one's too good. This is too good. So, the creativity, the sense of humor. Yes?
I have a question for you in
Okay.
your stories and stuff. What these early settlers, what were they saying about the Native Americans, the Indians that were here?
Interestingly, not much, because the settlement of this period was generally south of the Fox in Wisconsin. The Ho-Chunk had been pushed out. The Ojibwe were still here in the north. The Menominee were still here in the north. And so the actual day-to-day encounters were minimal, at least for the people who tended to write these things. Obviously, if you're an Indian agent, you're going to write this. Florantha Sproat, for instance, is a brave woman who was up in La Pointe in the 1840s, and she encountered Native Americans, and she had a stillbirth, and very, she says, my heart hungers for my babe, and she talks about how the Ojibwe people mourned with her and had a good relationship, but very, very surprisingly little about that.
Okay, so the Indians were pretty much pushed out by this time.
Right, I think that many, by this time, if you were living in that area south of the Fox in Wisconsin, your chances of encountering a Native American were minimal. You're certainly aware of them, they're aware of it as a concept, and probably not too favorable, I guess, just because they didn't actually encounter them in reality. Perhaps some of those who might be veterans of the Black Hawk War would have comments, but you're a new pioneer. You're interested in getting the land, starting building a house, house probably after the barn probably comes first, and you're writing back. We are limited only by what they chose to write back to people back in Europe or to people back in the East, and so that early generation is, there may have been conversations there that you just didn't put down in the letters, but I wish there was, but there wasn't.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes?
The Indian tribes you mentioned, any of those were pushed out from the east that ended up in Wisconsin to be pushed out again?
Yeah, I know I do include, I tend to think of the Stockbridge, Brotherton, Oneida as pioneers in their own way, because these are New York, Massachusetts, New England, and New York tribes that are basically pushing the Menominee, taking parts of their land, the reservation, and I came across a letter from a Stockbridge woman who had a relationship and married an officer in the Army. And he takes off, gets transferred, and takes off, and here she's left alone, and no means of support. The the Stockbridge, maybe it was his brother, I'm sorry, I didn't have to check if it was Brotherton Stockbridge, but when they broke up their land, both men and women could get allocations of land, but because she married outside of the tribe, she didn't get her allocation. So she petitioned the legislature for a divorce. The legislature didn't give it that. She eventually did move back into the community and lived into the early 20th century, very old woman and the like. So, but again, so we have that represented there. The black experience, very small, about 180 African Americans in Wisconsin in 1830. There's about 500 in the 1850s, and there are a number of men who went on to fight in the all-black regiments in the Civil War. There was a convention held in Milwaukee about the free blacks, and made up of former enslaved people, freedmen, and they pledged to resist the fugitive slave law. And it's interesting how many young men, one is a business owner, he owns, and I love the name of his business, the Pioneer Hair Salon. Isn't that a great name for a Milwaukee business? And, he's one of the older ones at 35, and they're bricklayers and masons and some other folks there. They petitioned for the vote. They petitioned for equal rights, and again, it took a long time to get that. So, others, yeah.
Well, of course, people were coming here. I mean, the land. What did they get for land? Were they able to homestead, or they bought it, or what?
Wouldn't have been a homestead at this time. And the Land Act is something that I always have to look at the detail, but the land offices opened in the 1830s. I believe there was one in Green Bay. I'm way looking at Adam, you might know, and I think there might be one in Prairie, I don't know, and eventually in Milwaukee. But you gotta wait for the land to be surveyed. And so pieces of land are issued. The early folks are buying it at a good price. And this is one of the things that our friend Christian Traugott-Ficker spends several pages talking about, how to find good land, because some of the best pieces of land were picked up early. So he was saying, well, you could buy land office land at a really good price. $1.25 an acre, I think it was, something like that. Which is a lot more in today's dollars, but his advice is, that land is the stuff that wasn't snapped up early. So you might be better off on that secondary market and buy the land at a higher price from someone else. So he's talking about, you gotta look at the location and those issues. Generally, the people who immigrated were not the poorest of the poor, in whether it be in the United States or in Europe. Generally, and nor were they the richest of the rich. There were people with enough capital to afford this ocean voyage or this trip across the country, or like our friend who traveled and worked jobs in order to accumulate capital to do that. And so it's complicated. It varies for the individuals.
Yeah, it seems like I've read the, land speculators, people that got the best land early on. Then they were actually advertising in Europe, trying to get the immigrants they come, a lot of these people they came in response to the ads.
Yeah, well, and actually the state of Wisconsin, and other states did, the state of Wisconsin ran advertisements in European newspapers, come to Wisconsin. They actually had offices set up in Germany and other places where you could get information on how to come to Wisconsin, because the real challenge in this early years is this labor shortage. We've got this new state, and we need enough people to generate the amount of economic activity to make this viable. It doesn't do you any good if you're the only one farming in this area and there are no markets for you to sell things. So, let me tell the final piece. I'm sorry, Teresa, but sense of humor. I think again we tend to think of seriousness, and one of my favorite bunch of guys, and they were guys, who called themselves the Muskego Lake Fishing Club, and they wrote there was a suggestion in the legislature to abolish liquor, to make the manufacture and sale of alcohol illegal in Wisconsin. Legislature actually passed that bill and the governor vetoed it. And there was a considerable disagreement about that. The certain groups of New Englanders thought this was a good idea, you know, temperance, people get drunk, and that's a good thing. There were other folks, like the Germans, who really didn't like it. There was a petition from 300 women who described themselves as the German housewives of Milwaukee, who say our men work hard, and when they come home, they need to have a glass of wine or a beer. And they say, Martin Luther supported this, so how could this be anti-religious? So, well, these fisher guys, or drinkers, in Muskego, make an argument to the legislature, and they make an argument that this is a bad idea to ban it. And they come up with a number of reasons. One, if we ban beer, wine, alcohol, people would drink water, they'd drain Lake Muskego, and they would kill all the fish. We have a biblical responsibility to care for all creation, and so it is anti-biblical to ban that. Two, fishing is guaranteed by Magna Carta. It guarantees the pursuit of happiness. We're happy when we're fishing. It's against that. And against the Declaration of Independence. Three, everyone knows fish tastes better when cooked in beer. You know?
There you go.
Right. Four, if we drain all the water, where do we get our water power from? All the water power is gone. No power, ending manufacturing. Therefore, we suggest that instead of banning liquor, you pass a law against the adulteration of good liquor. These folks could have written for a modern comedy show, and that's serious, but they got their wish. You know, beer continued, so thank you.
Thanks so much. So just a couple notes before you head out. Each of you had an event flyer on your seat. June is worked out this way this year, that June is where most of our events are. So take a look at what's coming up next few weekends. We also have, before you leave, just before you get to the front desk, we have a little clock set up and some surveys. And not a big survey or anything, just we want to know how people hear about events like this to help us be able to target that more. So if you have a couple minutes to fill out 6, 8 questions, got those out there. Our next talk, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Rob Harper, UW Stevens Point professor, talking about his talk's titled Sovereign Waterways, Indigenous Persistence in Wisconsin Rivers in the 19th Century. So looking at the ways that the native peoples in Wisconsin navigated their, this era of change that we've been talking about tonight, and how they used kind of the waterways as trails to be able to help them stay in the places they thought they belonged. So we're going to be taking a look at that on August 13th. So usually this is a monthly speaker series. We're skipping a month. July, I don't have anything, so August 13th is the next speaker series. And well, again, thank you all for coming. Thank you so much.